In today's Hiwatt soundbite, we're modulating our mixes. In today's session, I'd like to share a few thoughts on applying modulation to the parameters of the effects in our mix. The cumulative effect of all of these subtle little changes that you can apply through modulation, oh my goodness, watch out. So let's modulate our way right into a session. Well, earlier this week, I was working on a track that totally inspired me to just want to stop everything and start talking about modulation. Now, modulation can refer to a lot of different things. For today's session and for this example, we're talking about applying modulation to the effect parameters of our reverbs and our delays and our filters and so on in our mix. There's almost no limit to the things that we can apply modulation to. One of the greatest things of mixing today and working in DAWs and so on are all these plugins. I mean, these plugin developers are brilliant. The way that they're putting things in our hands that are so powerful, and so many of these manufacturers have designed the modulation right into their plugin. That is just so awesome that we can immediately reach for it. Well, I'm finding a correlation with the fact that the more modulation I add to my mix in general, the better it sounds. Now, there will be situations and mixes you're doing where modulating a delay will make no sense. But for a lot of pop music and electronic music and where there's just a ton of energy hitting you and a lot of different things, when you start to apply modulation to a whole bunch of different things, the cumulative effect of all of those modulating factors changing and subtly moving things, it's unbelievable what it can do to your mix. The richness and the depth that it can bring is unreal. So I threw together a session that's just a groove with a bass line and a bunch of drum loops. And I thought it would be a really neat experiment to go ahead and fire that together, lay down a piece of that track with no modulation going on, and then go back into all of my effects and just start messing with modulation, start modulating like delay times and depths and filters and filters opening up and closing down. So I've got 4 bars looped on this groove idea. I'm gonna go ahead and play the non-modulated mix, and then I'll switch to the modulated mix. Let's have a listen, check it. Okay, so the difference between those two mixes is pretty subtle, okay? So there's a lot of different things going on and a lot of different parameters being modulated, but none of them are jumping out of the speakers and announcing themselves. And that's the whole point. So let's jump into this track a little bit and check out some of probably the first thing we should do is focus on the bass line. The original bass line that I put together were these 2 parts. Okay, so for these 2 modular bass parts, I just went ahead and created a mono send and return for each one. And I took the return channel and I panned it to basically the opposite of whatever bass part I'm sending off of. And very typically in a situation like that, I'll add a little bit of delay, and I'm talking like 25 milliseconds to 27 milliseconds, something like that. And very important, I'll modulate the pitch just a little bit. In other words, I'll take that delayed signal and I'll apply modulation to the pitch of it so that a very slow and subtle amount of detuning is going on that other side. Check out the effect this has. It's just huge. Like, I'll just play one of the sounds and add this kind of chorus sound. I mean, it makes a big difference. Here they are dry without that. And with the chuds. Okay, so that's how I handled those bass lines. What else do we have in this track that's being affected? So it's just a super simple, basic hi-hat part. And instead of allowing it to just be static in the mix, I decided to put a little bit of filter on it that's sweeping around the phase. And then I put it through an auto panner, which is, again, another great way to modulate your mono tracks. If you want to use auto panners without jumping out of the speakers and announcing it, just pull that width in so that the auto pan is not going hard left and right. That tiny little bit of subtle movement that hi-hat might be having in the mix, it's just one of what might be 40 different things that are all changing and filters and stuff. It's so cool what you can do with modulation. It's unreal. What about this groovy sound? Check this. That's just a modulated filter sweep on the output of a really long reverb. Really cool effect. The big classic house loop with a bit of phase on it. So again, it's subtle, that we're not talking about something that's jumping out and smacking you in the head. I swear that this stuff just piles up and ends up sounding so cool. A little modular noise sound that sounds awesome with a tiny bit of phaser on it. You can see that these all add up very quickly. There's another bass line that makes up part of this track. And again, it's got another phase thing going on it. So this is a simple example, obviously, but you start to see and hear the power of modulation. When you start to have that cumulative effect like stack up on you, when you're working on a mix and maybe you're at it all day, or maybe it's a 2 or 3 day mix because it's a really big track that needs a lot of work, these little subtle changes that you make to your mix along the way can just have huge, awesome results in the end. I just encourage you to start modulating just about everything, because in my experience, the more stuff that I modulate in subtle ways, the more interesting my mixes sound. Oh, and I almost missed a really important point. On your plugins, most modern plugins nowadays have a sync capability where you click the button and everything in that effect is now synchronized with the tempo of the track. For the most part, when I'm going for a really low frequency oscillator that I just want a really slow up and down effect on something, absolutely not locking it to tempo. I want all of those oscillators just running free, because that's part of the magic. So I encourage you to reach for that modulation knob and listen to what happens to your mixes. Well, thank you very much for sitting in on today's session. And if you feel this has value, please consider subscribing to my channel. And by all means, go ahead and share this session with a couple of friends or colleagues.